They let me come up on my own now. I've graduated. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks for watching online. You know the drill. There's the code here. You can scan that and ask me questions and tell me what I got wrong along the way. There's codes also in the leaflets in front of you. So let's get to it. What do we mean by music being good? Well, we could look externally and ask other people, critics even, and they might give us a league table. These are purely illustrative with high value and low value music. And then we can fill these in however we wish. Now, we are all individuals, so we don't need to conform to this. We can look internally. And this motion is called a guilty pleasure. We shouldn't be guilty, it should be proud defiance, actually. But no one talks about the other end, which is the guilty displeasure. So one gives us the raised eyebrows, the other the gasps. Why is this? Well, one reason is even dedicated musicians have a particular affinity to music they first heard in their mid-teens and around that area. It's called the reminiscence bump. And I'm going to name the other bit the grump slump, when it doesn't do it for you anymore. Now, even if we lived in the same time, we wouldn't hear the same music necessarily, but born at different ages, it means there's disparity here. You just don't get it between these two. There are other reasons. Music is an acquired taste. These are contemporaneous critiques of great composers. Look at the bottom left and get ready to gasp. There you go. Nauseous claptrap from Gresham. And if they say this about great composers, imagine progressive composers. You might guess some of these. Stravinsky. Anyone want to guess this one? These three are my favorite, particularly the Irish potato under the influence of powerful atomizer, which actually I want to hear now. And just anybody can get these sort of critiques. Whoops. Okay. Beloved pop artists are under the same critiques. Oh my gosh, I told you about the gasps. And even people who should know better, great composers about great composers. Tchaikovsky called Brahms these lovely terms, and my new favorite insult, a giftless bastard. So there's some thing with music is that we like the familiar and we like the novel, but it's a non-linear thing. You might be aware of this curve. It's called the uncanny valley. It's usually in reference to animation or robotics, where if we're trying to mimic a human is the epitome, the target, but there's a cute area on the left. But as we get close to human, but not close enough, there's this revulsion we have called the uncanny valley. These are to mannequins, ventriloquist dummies, and me with Madame Tussauds. I think there's the same with instrumental emulation also. We like synthesis 8-bit, convincing sampled instruments, but there's this trough when we try to imitate an acoustic instrument and don't quite make it. So there's this element of being too close to comfort. See, noise is okay, and music and harmonicity is wonderful, but somewhere in between has this revulsion. And I love the Vuvuzela, but it has that effect on people that it's a sort of musical charlatan. Let's compare it to a trumpet. It's got similar harmonics, but they go up just a little bit too high. And so we have this response to it. So we put it in a musical context, and you'll find this uncanny response to it. You get the idea. In Lecture 1, we looked at reasons why we love music and it moves us. It's a model called Breck-Verma, but there is we had a cuter acronym of Everbeam, if you remember. But the same reason we love music is also reasons why we don't like it. Let's call it Neverbeam. These are your responses from the survey. Episodic memory can remind us of a bad time. Brainstem reflex can be irritating and annoying. And even emotion, we can detect emotion, but we feel manipulated by it. These are all your responses here. This brings us to consonance and dissonance. See, if you look up dictionary definitions, there's this suggestion that dissonance is unpleasant and consonance is pleasant. But music doesn't always need to be pleasant. Nice is a 4-letter word describing music. And you'll find there are positive and negative attributes given to both consonance and dissonance. So here's the paradox. Pleasantness doesn't mean musical enjoyment always, and dissonance doesn't mean it's unenjoyable. In fact, just like we need some seasoning on our food, there are styles where some dissonance is baked in. Triads on the beat don't do it for funk and blues. We need a little bit of dissonance with the 7th, and we need some offbeat syncopation. And then that feels correct.
You got your high sneakers on, stepping you. You got your high sneakers on.
We enjoy this griminess. And there's these terms that have come up through the ages. It used to be called vigor, but now Zappa called it eyebrows. The new one is stank face. And the word funk stems from the Latin word meaning a smell. So it's as if the music is so flavoursome, it bleeds into other senses of taste and smell and touch. And when we hear descriptions of music that we enjoy, they're things like dirty and nasty and monstrous. I mean, if you pull this face eating a meal, it would not be a great review. But for somehow with music, this is the aim, to make people look disgusted. Now, I tend to pull this face, and I'll try and minimize it during this talk. But there's this beauty in the ugly. Dissonance has many dimensions. Some of them are built-in, physiological, some are very cultural and learned. And you can think of it as a group of dichotomies like these. And these are all happening at once, pulling in different directions, which creates that rich experience. Can we find an objective measure of it? Well, this brings us to Euler, who was a genius in many different fields and contributed much, including these symbols in the middle here. But he also contributed a lot to music theory. And he came up with this beautiful concept, the gradus suavitatis, the degree of suavity, of sweetness between two intervals. Now, I see some people glazing over with this, so we'll get through it, I promise. But here's the idea. Two notes are sort of in a frequency relationship with each other. One might be double the other or 3/5 of the other. And what he does is assign a value to how far away they are in terms of these numbers. If you double it, go up octaves, you get a point of suavity, and the same in the other direction. But there are other prime numbers, and they have higher values of flavor in his system. Up the perfect 5th, gives us 3 points, and then additional points this way. And we can expand it out from any of these points here till we have this multidimensional grid of pleasantness, which I've laid out a part of it here. Now, let's test it out. We'll go down from some consonants to some dissonant intervals. Seems to work. Whoop. That's just one square on this huge grid that we could theorize that comes out. Now, there's a limit to our perception, but it's amazing how such a simple idea actually works. And Leibniz put it quite beautifully. It's that our soul makes these calculations, and we don't know it's doing that. But there's a logic, an inner logic that happens that we feel in music. And in fact, it's not just humans that feel consonance and dissonance. A study showed that infant chimpanzees can recognize consonance and dissonance and shows preference to each of these. So perhaps, too, they have a similar soul. How on earth does this work? Well, the harmonic series is an off-cited explanation. So we're playing two notes against each other. They tend to each have their own harmonic pattern. And if we increase the frequency of one against the other, what you'll see is some alignments and misalignments. And it turns out that the octave has many alignments. It's near equivalence. The fifth, fewer number, but still consonant. The major third, fewer. And then minor second takes a long time to wrap around. What's beautiful about this idea is that it doesn't just work on the pitch level, but if we turn it this way, we can think about this sweetness in terms of rhythm, how rhythms collide. So, for example, the rhythmic octave is something 2 against 1. So we'll hear it in this example, the clicks against the beats. Consonant. What about this pattern? It's a sort of rhythmic perfect fourth. It's the doo-wops that Ella Fitzgerald will sing.
Oh, it don't mean a thing if it ain't got that swing. Do-ah, 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 do-ah.
Oh. So I can't help the face. I'm so sorry. Let's increase the dial again. This beautiful tune has a guitar part that has a 5 subdivision phrase against a normative 4/4. So you get this wonderful phasing that occurs, a sort of rhythmic major third. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Some people take this really far. The metal band Meshuggah are a genre called math metal. I would say they are A-level math metal. What they like to do is have segments of 4/4, good old-fashioned rock 4/4, 8-bar phrases, but then run a very high primed number. It's 25 against 16. Which would give us a sweetness rating of 13. Okay, so you're going to have 8 bars of 4/4 against this 25/16, and then a 3/16 gap before it comes in again. I will attempt to conduct 8 bars of 4/4 and count it out against that. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, so beautiful. Oh, no. Okay. Yes, okay, thank you very much. This also explains timbral dissonance. We can have harmonics above a single note, but if we start to move them around, there is a roughness. And we are super sensitive to this roughness because it's how we recognize words that they're spoken. For example, when I say A, E, I, or U, what I'm doing is changing the intensity of two formants above above the fundamental. And that's how you can understand what I'm saying, hopefully. So what I'll do is generate those two formants just with an XY. And you should hear things that sound like vowels. Now, this is purely electronic, and it'll sound a little uncanny, perhaps, but you should recognize these sort of vowels emerge. And musicians use this also. In fact, musicians are manipulating these dissonances on multiple dimensions. Let's take Aretha Franklin. You will hear intervallic dissonances with melody. You will hear her control of timbre. You'll see if the brightness of the higher harmonics come. There's rhythmic syncopation, and there's also bends and stability, creating high order dissonances. This is just our isolated vocals. I will get chills and probably make a face at one point. Just warning. Modulation. But these can be done instrumentally also, both with playing technique and signal processing. Here's Jimi Hendrix's vocalizing through wah-wah and his playing technique. Promised I wouldn't make that face. Okay. Talking about Jimi Hendrix, it's not just the sound and the rhythmic quality, but the harmony, the chords, intervals against each other. And speaking of the logic of the soul, when I first heard, at that reminiscence bump, Jimi Hendrix, I heard this one chord, now called the Hendrix chord. Sometimes it's called dominant 7 sharp 9, but it's really just 4 notes, not 5. And somehow I knew it was special. It just cut in with this visceral directness. I didn't know why, but it just spoke to me immediately. Here it is. Let it hang there for a while. Why is it? What is that scrunchiness? Well, we can explain this complexity to some degree with very simple systems. Music's so complicated, sometimes you need a simple inroad. And this is called pitch class set theory. So you wouldn't get it unless you were at university, but I'd like to teach it to you in 10 minutes rather than 3 years and £27,000. So here's the idea. Let's make some simplifications. Let's assume there are only 12 notes per octave, and from lecture 3 we know that's a simplification. And we'll assume octave equivalence. That means a C, wherever it is on the piano, is still a C. and will be neutral in terms of intervals, whether they go up or down. That's the concessions we make. And from that, we get the idea that there are 12 pitch classes. The pitch class C, the pitch class C sharp, and so on. And so we can put them on a clock face here. So let's hear some of them. I'll split the octaves. And all of them. There you go. That was the first year. But here's the interesting thing. We can think of intervals now as simply connections between those positions on the clock. Just bars that connect those points. These are called interval classes. They can either be the same, or they can be one step apart, two step apart, and so on. That's it. And they each have different qualities. I think of them as spices. The one on the far left is quite spicy and has a bite to it. It's the sharpest dissonance. Then the next one is less dissonant, and so on. I'll talk you through them as we go along. The less dissonant interval class 2. Now the sweeter intervals, the minor third, major third, and their inversions. The major third. And the very stable and consonants, fifths and fourths, that form the structure to a lot of music, as we discovered last lecture. And finally, interval class 6 has a mystery, restlessness about it, perhaps. So every chord is built up of these interval classes. We'll go through them. With different levels of scrunchiness on my scrunchometer. So when we have a chord, I like to think of it as clinking glasses or fist bumping. So imagine there's two people. Actually, imagine there's one person. There's no clinks to be heard. So a one note has no intervals. But two, there's one clink, one interval. Three people, there are three intervals, and so on. In fact, that is the formula for working out. For example, the 4 intervals is 4 times 3, which is 12, I'm told, divided by 2 is 6. You can tell I'm really fun at parties, but you can work out how many, if we've completed all the glass clinking. And here's how they go. So the more intervals, the more opportunity for scrunchiness. And all you need to know for now is that the ends really matter. In fact, we discovered in that vulture bone flute that we avoided those outer points. So we can measure scrunchiness in some way, to some degree, by this profile, a flavor profile. Let's go through some. For example, if we want to have a perfect fifth, we can create the major and minor triad. We can make a sus chord, but that adds some dissonance, or we could make the Maria triachord, adding some scrunchiness. How about unstable trichords? They do not have the fifth in them, and we can invent some of these. Or the most dissonant of this group. Ooh, now you'll get a degree. 4-note chords. I'll just play through some of these with increasing level of dissonance. They're familiar ones, but you can see their profiles spread to the sides. And Let's compare two pentatonics. Our vulture bone flute, the major pentatonic, with that Japanese traditional scale, the sakura pentatonic, as it's sometimes called. And you'll see the sakura has a little more bite to it. And the sakura. There's a scale faded by Debussy, which are 6 notes, evenly spaced, the whole tone scale. And what you'll find is that, in fact, it avoids certain intervals. Not sure why I did that. But it shows that dissonance can actually happen from the avoidance of certain intervals. And because there's no fifths, there has this acentricity. It seems that there's no home, which is one of our dimensions of dissonance. 7-note scales, we can see these advance from the diatonic, the acoustic, to the harmonic minor, spreading outwards. And the harmonic minor, which adds a few more dissonant intervals. How far does this go? Well, all 12 notes. Get ready for it and watch out for the scrunchometer, which will max out. But musicians use this dial of dissonance. Jazz musicians like to toy with it. For example, taking a standard 2-5-1 and pulling at certain points in it to add some dissonant expression. This is when it starts to lose people. That's okay. Still with us? No? And this wonderful one here. And composers like the wonderful Takemitsu, who intuitively use dissonance as a expressive medium in chords that escape easy naming. Beautiful. But there's a way of making dissonance in an efficient manner. Remember the clinking glasses. If there's 4 people, there are 6 clinks, so 6 intervals. But there are 6 interval classes, and it's in fact possible to represent every interval class with just 4 notes. It's a sort of efficient dissonance. They're called all-interval tetrachords for obvious reasons, and there are 4 of them. The Lydian tetrachord, its reflection, the Phrygian tetrachord, the edgier octatonic tetrachord, and this last one, which may feel familiar. It is the Hendrix chord. So somehow I knew in my logical soul that this chord was special, and there it is. There are other ways for things to be dissonant beyond that roughness. It's around the idea of proximity. What is close and far in terms of music? And that's, again, a paradoxical continuum. For example, if we take C major and D minor, all the notes move. It has what's called a chromatic distance of 5, because that's the amount of notes that move, semitones on the piano. Let's take one that's closer in this regard, C sharp minor. One of the notes is the same, the other's just moved by a semitone. So surely the latter should feel closer. But when we hear that, we do not get that experience. So that's C to D minor, now C to C sharp minor. What? Why does that feel more distant? If we set them on the chromatic circle, you can see that the blue and the red are close. But if we represent them in the circle of fifths, which there might be reason to believe matters, suddenly it becomes clear, even though they share a note, they are very far apart. We also have this amazing ability listening to music where we group things. They don't have to happen at the same time. We have this thing called macro harmonies. So collectively, C and D minor create that medieval hexachord we heard last time. But these two chords make something altogether more mysterious. And this idea of home and away is integral to common practice music making. A minor seems to be close to other shared harmonies, and we can create sort of orbital structures that want to lead to these to get back home into this sort of network, a template for making music. And we intuitively know that. Even with single notes, we hear this happening. Seems so right. And again, Euler formalized a way of thinking about this idea of musical proximity. It's something called a tonitz, and here's his diagram of it. It basically arranges the notes in closeness in terms of fifths, major thirds, and minor thirds, which we see laid out here on the tonitz. Fifths, major thirds, and minor thirds. And in fact, if we travel this direction, we get this familiar feel of diatonic triads. But we can travel in different dimensions and create a more eerie collection of chords. The mysterious hexatonic and the gritty octatonic. Here's Brahms, that giftless bastard, navigating along a hexachonic cycle really beautifully. What this creates is something that might be called contrastive valence. It's saying two things at the same time, and this is a very high level of dissonance. Major and minor duality. The opening of Rite of Spring features it with just two notes, C and C sharp, which are at contrast because they suggest both A minor and A major at the same time. Let's zoom in on that moment there. We'll just freeze on that moment. Just sit in that for a moment, won't you? Prokofiev extends it with full chords at the same time, an A minor major chord in this passage. It goes by quick, but let's hear it again. Oh, sorry for making those noises. Tchaikovsky, who apparently wasn't a giftless bastard, I'm going to say it 3 times now, didn't superimpose them, but separated chords by minor thirds in this passage, creating an otherness. And not to be outdone, Stravinsky flat out put the most distant chords together, C major and F sharp major. The Petrushka chord, which you can hear in this passage, in the accompaniment meshed together, and then the melody switches between the two. And Piazzolla, in fact, goes further by not just doing the 2 triads, but extends them into key areas of their own. You hear it split between the 2 guitars here. Beautiful. Now, we shouldn't assume that this is just a progression through the ages get to increasing dissonance. There are these moments, particularly in the Renaissance, of incredible dissonance of this sort, sometimes called false relations. And here you'll see D sharps and D naturals occurring with the grooviest rhythm in this beautiful 16th century piece. There is also a dissonance to be had in waiting, an anticipation. In fact, latest research shows that we gain pleasure by rewards, eating, and other activities. But there are also opportunities for pleasures and mechanisms in the brain during the wanting phase, where we're hunting or foraging for food or seeking something out. And music seems to tap into that, the enjoyment of waiting or searching, and then being rewarded, and then this learning phase which helps us move on to the next cycle of anticipation. This Chopin piece is a case study in such anticipation. It's very simple, really. The first chord is a first inversion E minor, and it ends with the root inversion E minor. This, and it ends with this. And the melody simply descends from B we all know somehow what the next note is without hearing it, so I won't play it. But what we'll do is jump to the end of the piece and see this pattern of anticipation. What happens is that we do eventually reach that root note, but what that hand gives, literally, the other takes away by not landing on the correct chord, and a series of colorizations of that target note until finally we reach the inevitable tragic ending. There is a pleasure to be had in striving for something, a sort of meaningful pleasure that we have to earn, and music somehow represents that. It needs both those dissonances and consonances. And we'll end with this final case study of a jazz guitarist called Pat Martino, who sadly passed away recently. He was an astonishing human and player, and in fact, from the age of 16, he was touring professionally, cut his first album as a sideman, and his debut album won much acclaim. There's him with George Benson, and he has this perfect mix of consonance and dissonance and all these dimensions. The jazz guitarist, my old jazz guitarist Garrison Fuel, said, like a Philly cheesesteak, which is apparently a type of food, his playing has sustenance with the perfect amount of grease. So let's listen to him as a young man, perfectly meeting the harmonies, improvising through these harmonies, but the right level of delay in his playing and bluesy touch and attack. Wait a bit more. So I know I should stop. I can't help it. Pat Martino was an incredible player. He could memorize whole passages and produce these lines on the guitar or on any instrument. To produce these lines at that tempo is extraordinary at any age. But over the years, he had some issues, and it turned out that in his brain, there was this huge blood clot growing. And I mean huge, that he had a near-fatal seizure in 1980, and a surgery, which could have gone either way, removed this huge clot from his brain. There's the whole of it on the right side image there. And when he came to, he had severe amnesia, so much so that he had to be reminded, in fact, convinced that he was a musician. And so someone showed us the record cover, and he said, well, it looks like me, so maybe I can play. So he had to slowly relearn. The legend says he transcribed his own recordings to learn again. So he's described as the only jazz master who had to do it twice. But he returned with an incredible resurgence. And within a few years, he was playing as well as before, and actually with a sort of maturity, which might have come anyway, but there was this added insight, almost like the logic of his soul was exposed, and he did these beautiful diagrams and connections. He made the connection of the I Ching, which are 6 lines that can be broken, unbroken, to the idea of what you can play on the guitar. 64 ways of voicing something that he used directly. And you might recognize some of these diagrams from earlier that he had this insight on. His Return album was absolutely wonderful, and in 2007 and 2008, we produced a documentary about his life, and I had the privilege of working with him on the music and recording some music with him for the score. And it was the time I was doing my PhD, so I was really interested in his playing and some of these dissonances that he was producing. For example, this is his playing on this beautiful piece he wrote called Welcome to a Prayer. Now, in jazz, what you have is a lead sheet. It's a sort of, it shows the melody, but no one plays the melody like that. It's sort of this reference point, and part of the expression is pulling away from that melody. And I was trying to show how he modulated and pulled away, always behind the unheard melody, in the internal melody. And so what this is, what I'll do is play the melody against his improvisation, and you can hear that internal conversation happening. That diagram shows the amount of pull in each phrase. So we'll end this lecture, I think, by listening to 2 minutes of him improvising on this piece, and I will bring up the various measures of dissonance that might be occurring in his soul. There's an ancient Greek concept of eudaimonia. It's a sort of pleasure which I think of as a meaningful pleasure, a pleasure that's won through striving for something and through learning. And music involves this cycle of anticipation, reward, and learning, and makes us whole. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much to Milton for another wonderful lecture. I'm Dominic Broomfield-McHugh, visiting professor of film and theatre music. I'm particularly pleased that we got both Cats and West Side Story into that one. As Milton said at the beginning, we have the special Slido QR code so that you can ask questions. I did want to begin, though, with a question about Giftless Bastards. Do you want to name any of your own?
Giftless Bastards?
Well, like famous. No. Are there any famous composers
no, I mean,
long
music
dead?
Is really, really hard. And
you're a diplomat. Oh my
no,
goodness.
But I love I love everything, but I think we all have some of those exaggerated pleasures. And when people often ask me what my favorite thing is, and I refuse to answer apart from Bach. But something that kind of gets me is music where I'm obliged to dance to, and it's a sort of music that doesn't have much timbral change, and that is a sort of mediocre Eurovision, Euro-techno thing which is about a certain tempo, and it's very generic, and it's a very particular type of...
Why is it mediocre, though?
Because there's no surprise, and everything is binary and so on. But that said, I wrote an article about it, and we produced a song mimicking this, and now I kind of love it. I kind of love it. Gareth Malone saw it and called me a rap god. I'm not a rap god. But, so everything is interesting, and some things I'm deeply moved by, and that's as far as I'll go.
Okay, and can you tell us any more about Euler? I was obsessed with actually the images of him, because he looks so kind of quirky as an individual.
He lived a long time. He lost his eyesight. It didn't seem to stop him. And his contributions to maths, I think he invented graph theory. Those symbols, pi, that's the idea of a sum, the idea of a function. And in his spare time, he basically invented the tonics, which everyone thinks they invented on YouTube. And this measure of consonance and dissonance, kind of an extraordinary Newtonian figure, really.
Fascinating. Okay, let's turn to the people's questions. Someone says, going back to the start, would the Beatles hit a higher scrunchy meter reading than Bach?
Oh, well, first of all, I should say that the scrunchiometer is really silly because it's one dial, which doesn't account for anything, but it does give some impression. Let's think. I'm trying to think of Beatles chords versus Bach chords. I don't think so. I mean, if we sing a number of notes and what the crunchiness happens, I think there's probably more dissonance in terms of verticality in the polyphonic writing of Bach. It sounds like a PhD there.
Okay. I think you've sort of answered this near the beginning. Is our response to scary music innate or learned, ditto, calm, sad, exciting, happy? So you talked a bit at the beginning about how music is socialized and how some of these reactions are socialized and some of them are not.
So scary music, it depends what you mean. Some things have what's called brainstem reflex, which we can't help respond to, which is probably the most culturally shared responses, which are sharp sounds and low rumbles and those sort of things, and they're used overtly. In terms of harmonic dissonances, we should be careful not to generalize about any of these things, but it does seem that, in general, as a theme, octaves and fifths are felt as more stable than minor seconds. That's not to say it's universal.
Super. Helen asks, you have used music to help us hear and understand complex data more intuitively. How could we further use consonance and dissonance for that purpose?
Oh, that's just a too beautiful question.
I
don't want to spend too long on it, but
you've got an hour. Go.
So I'm very interested in the use of musical translation. Music is an incredible language that we innately learn. It's not good for certain symbolic things, but it's very good at appreciation of multiple dimensions. And there's a field, data music sonification, which uses our hearing faculties in the representation of data. People who know me at all know I'm deep into that world. I've got a book coming out in a matter of weeks called Hidden Music, The Composer's Guide to Sonification, which is just that idea. So year 3, we'll have a lot of that.
Year 3, that's a very advanced trailer. Good. In regards to the Hendrix chord, Anonymous says they didn't feel it when it was played on the demo keys, as opposed to how they felt when Hendrix plays it. Why is this?
Because of the upper harmonics produced by the distortion, basically. I wanted to hear it in a pure form and then see it in context. But yes, remember those harmonic series, and what distortion does is brighten up those higher partials, and so it exaggerates the roughness of those intervals.
There is even a bit of that with the Rite of Spring, isn't there? I was dismayed to see the piano score because when it's played...
It's a different thing.
So
a score is a very impoverished view. It's a useful lens, but it does not capture the dimensionality of sound.
And the next question, moving on very helpfully from that, is how does sonority and timbre relate to how we experience consonance and dissonance?
So there's mappings of harmonics, but it's very complex, and a lot has been done on that. I didn't have time for it. I had quite a few things in here, but there have been attempts to map not just intervals, but whole sounds against each other. There's a study of Xenakis, a former Gresham professor of music, and the dimension, a dissonance dimension based on the sounds, not just the harmonic intervals. So it's complicated, but it can be done, and there are papers galore if anyone wants to, has the stomach for them.
Mm-hmm. And someone says, would the general principles and ideas you've presented also apply to music from other cultures which don't use the 12 tones we are used to?
Yeah, that's a good point also. And this idea of proximity also, the tonnets does that coincide. A lot of these were admittedly overtly Western ideas, or common practice at least, of these. There's a paper I've cited in my accompanying essay which looks more globally at these ideas. But I do think there are themes of anticipation and rhythmic complexity and timbral effect, particularly when linked to language, that are very, very common. But we should be careful about generalizing about pitch relationships like that.
Super. Well, I think that's a lovely place to stop. Do you want to quickly tell us about the next lecture, the final one of your first year? I can't believe we're already there.
Me neither. So May 16th, it's my final of the series, and it answers the question, is music infinite? Will we run out of music, good music, or any music? I don't want to give it away, but it's an obvious answer.
Next time, brilliant. Well,
but
you can sign
I
up.
have to find out now.
Can we thank once again Milton for this?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. All right.